Welcome, everybody. We have four of us here today, which you'll get to hear from each of us and be thinking about questions that you might want to ask us. This is a special extended version of the webinar. We have 2 hours, and we have tried to save some time to field any questions you might have about brain health programming. Introductions, we're going to hear from Dr. Mike Studer. Mike has been a physical therapist since 1991. He has spoken all over the world, and he's an adjunct professor at a couple of different universities. He was named the National Clinician of the Year for both the Neurologic and the Geriatric Academies of the American Physical Therapy Association. He's a prolific author, and his latest book is The Brain That Chooses Itself, and you have his contact information here as well. We also have Ryan Glatt with the Pacific Neuroscience Institute. Ryan is close to finishing up his PhD and has really become an expert in this field. We're glad to have Ryan here. He's also a professor at West Georgia University. Is that right, Ryan? Yep. And I'm Rob Winningham. I've been doing this work for several decades now. My background is in neuropsychology and neuroscience, and I just love sharing information. And I kind of think of this as translational research, really kind of being into the research, the science, but also being able to make it applied, which we are certainly doing here today. We're also joined with Kathy Lamberti, the CEO of SMARTfit. So looking forward to hearing from everybody. I always learn from all of you. So we have a packed agenda. We really are trying to give this a comprehensive overview for brain health. We're going to begin with some information about cognitive stimulation, different types of interventions, and prognoses for different populations. Physical exercise, we have to talk about that if we're talking about brain health. I think there's probably more published studies in that space than any of the sectors we're going to talk about. So we'll go through some of that background research and also talk about which populations benefit the most. And it's always fun to talk about some of the physiological underpinnings. Why does physical exercise help our brain health, executive functioning, ability to make new memories and stay independent? A lot of good information there. And then dual tasking, one of the hottest areas of brain health now, and something that SmartFit really specializes in terms of assessing it over time, but also training it to get the maximal benefits. So really one of the most effective interventions for brain health is dual tasking, and we'll hear about that today. The other thing that you'll hear today are a lot of other interventions and factors. And in my mind, this is important for professionals to know to help improve others' health literacy. The research has shown when older adults know more about the science, they're more motivated to engage in the behaviors that have been shown to improve quality of life and maximize brain health, independence, and cognitive ability. So a lot of different factors we'll discuss there: sleep, social engagement, nutrition. But for the practitioners, I think it's incredibly important to think about motivating your residents and clients. We know how to help people. The science is clear, and we now have products and supports like SmartFit, but we have to get the residents and the clients down to our gyms. They have to come to our programming. And so we'll be talking about motivation. Really, Dr. Studer is one of the world's leading experts on gamification, which can really maximize participation and outcomes. So we'll get to hear from Dr. Studer on that. We can also talk about the different venues in brain health. If you have questions about that, that would be great. And kind of the economics and marketing of brain health. But if you've ever heard me speak before, I always begin with executive functioning. I can't really talk about the research in the brain health space without using this phrase. So we'll quickly define it. Executive functioning includes your ability to pay attention. And if you can pay attention, that's going to allow you to make new memories. It sounds really obvious, but it took us a long time to figure this out. If we can improve attention, also inhibition, then we see real world gains that generalize beyond the training. If we have somebody doing Sudoku for a cognitive stimulation program, we don't want them just to get better at Sudoku. We want it to generalize to untrained abilities. And if we improve executive functioning, that happens. So inhibition is not doing something. So if you don't think about something, if you can engage in behavioral inhibition, that helps you attend to what's important and make a new memory. That's a part of executive functioning, as is problem solving, planning, and the capacity of our working or short-term memory. That's how much information we can hold at any given time. So that's executive functioning, and you'll see this come up, the idea of executive functioning come up when we look at the research and what is possible. But once again, I want to stress, if we can improve executive functioning, that generalizes or transfers to other areas of life. We also know that higher levels of executive functioning are associated with greater independence, better ability to drive, less likely to have a fall, but really just overall quality of life and things such as social engagement. That's the goal. Improve executive functioning, or maintain it as long as we possibly can. That's going to lead to real world benefits. And we have seen many types of interventions that are controllable, have led to improvements in executive functioning. So you see those on the list there. I'm not going to read them all for you, but we are going to talk about some more of these in detail. So research behind all of these have shown that they're associated with improvements in executive functioning. But many of these, most of these that are on the screen now, have been subjected to randomized controlled trials. So that gets us closer to being able to say that aerobic training, strength training, cognitive stimulation causes improvements in executive functioning. So, I like to do meta-analyses. Meta-analyses, when we take a large group or all of the studies published in a given area, we combine the data and look at the results. Meta-analyses are important because there's sometimes publication biases that, or somebody might just grab that one study that kind of supports their viewpoint. You can't do that with a meta-analysis. It's all of the high quality research done. The researchers put it together in an unbiased way. We look at the results. So I like to use meta-analyses. They also tell us when there's a lot of research in a given area. For example, in this 2022 meta-analysis, there were 45 high quality published studies on the effects of online cognitive training on brain health or executive functioning. And researchers, they combined all of the data and they showed that the online cognitive training leads to improvements in executive functioning. And it's easy to show that that also leads to improvements in the ability to make new memories. And that's important too for quality of life. You need to remember that you have a doctor's appointment tomorrow. You need to remember that you're doing a 12-hour fast for your blood draw and you're not supposed to eat anything after dinner. You need to remember that you already told somebody that story. You need to remember that you already took your medication. So these improvements in executive functioning leading to improvements in attention and the ability to make new memories, you really can see how that impacts one's ability to live independently and safely. So that's exciting that the online training can do that. When they combined all of the data, they also found, and a lot of studies have shown this, I even have published research that has shown this with cognitive training programs, a reduction in depression. Usually we'll measure the number of depressive symptoms. And these online cognitive training programs lead to reduction in depression many times relative to a control group. I'm not sure anybody exactly knows why that is, but one of our hypotheses is if we can improve the ability to inhibit, to turn off a negative thought, for example, that might prevent depression. You can make the argument the same would be true for anxiety. If you can quiet some anxious thoughts, then that could lead to some mental health benefits. So it's interesting that, I did publish a study over 20 years ago that found this with cognitive training, but other researchers have also found that. So that's exciting. The other thing that was helpful in this meta-analysis is the programs need to last for at least 6 weeks for maximal results. And we're going to talk about a lot of factors, but this article here, published in the journal Neurology, found that how much our memory changes with age, about 15% of that is determined by our level of cognitive stimulation. So it's a significant factor, and it's one that needs to be considered. This was actually a former student of mine, Justin Carr. He's at the University of Kentucky now. He conducted a 46 study meta-analysis on the effects of cognitive training and or physical exercise. So now we're getting into a little bit of dual tasking, and looked at cognitive abilities. And the results of his meta-analysis was that either cognitive training or physical training led to improvements in executive functioning and thus some real world benefits. And so, I like to highlight executive functioning as something like Sudoku. When we do something like crossword puzzles, they can be fun, it's enjoyable to do, it might facilitate some conversation, but it actually doesn't exercise executive functioning in the same way. When you do a Sudoku puzzle, and you need to have numbers 1 through 9 in every row, every column, and every subsquare, you have to use executive functioning. So let's look at this top center subsquare. It has 6, 7, 8, 9 in it. So you can hold that in your working memory and figure you need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, where does 5 go in this top center subsquare? Well, if you notice a 5 in that top row, a 5 in the third row, you know that the 5 has to go there. If you look at the very center subsquare, what numbers are missing there? I'll give you a moment. Numbers 1, 5, and 9. That requires executive functioning. You're holding on to information, the rules, the parameters. While you do a scan, I don't see a 1, but I see a 2, 3, 4. I don't see a 5, but I see a 6, 7, 8. I don't see a 9. 1, 5, and 9 are missing. That's executive functioning. That's what we want to exercise to lead to improvements that can generalize. So where does that 5 go? Does it go in cell A, B, or C? Well, it can't go in C because we have a 5 in that column. It can't go in B because we have a 5 in that column. So the 5 goes there. The 1 goes there because we have a 1 in this column. And then we need a 9 there. These are the types of activities that are really effective. We have these with the SMARTfit technology. There's various subscription programs, online apps you can use, which are high quality, particularly the subscription ones. But we also have paper and pencil. So I don't usually advertise my stuff here, but it's a great resource. We have a Cranium Crunches workbook, which has something like 140 brain training games in there that could be used to supplement other brain health things. So you can find that on Amazon. One of the things that made me think about this, we have mini Sudokus here, so you can get people kind of addicted to them. They can have success, and you can engage some cognitive training. So I published a literature review in this space a couple of years ago. We looked at many different studies, and what we found was that the cognitive training, the people with mild cognitive impairment and early stage dementia seem to benefit the most from this cognitive stimulation like training. Some of it can be done online. You can do a paper and pencil, but that was an important finding in the meta-analyses. It looks like optimal session length is 30 to 60 minutes based on the published research. It needs to be done a few times a week for at least 6 weeks to get significant improvements. And the other thing that popped out in the research, which I think is important, is we see that it's easier to document improvements in executive functioning in older adults relative to middle-aged and younger adults. We don't know why this is, but there might be a ceiling effect to the test that you can only get so high on a cognitive test. If you start to slip a little bit, there's more room for improvement. So it might be a ceiling effect, but it's a robust finding we see in the literature. Now, the other factor, and I'm not going to be the only one that talks about this, but this is a big factor, is physical exercise or physical activity on cognition. there's a really strong connection between physical activity and cognitive ability. And I like to go back to what I really kind of think of this as a classic study because it was the first meta-analysis published in this area. It was over 20 years ago. But like we're seeing, the older people are, the more physical exercise helped. The longer they did the program, the more the physical exercise helped. So probably not any huge surprises there. But that second point, they really kind of broke this field open in this meta-analysis, where they, for the first time, reported that in a meta-analysis that aerobic and strength training was better in terms of improving cognition than aerobic alone. And a lot of researchers have followed up on that point over time. And we now have some good information, which I'll share about strength training, which needs to be done in addition to aerobic training and some other interventions for maximal benefit. The research is really convincing on that. So we see same day benefits from physical exercise on cognition. And then we see longer term benefits, probably for different physiological reasons. This is what I'm really excited about. It's the strength training. I think people know they need aerobic training. They need to walk. They need to get their heart rate up, their breathing rate up. People know they need to do that. But what I feel like is missing in some brain health programs is a strong emphasis on resistance training or strength training. So in this study, they followed older adults for 12 months and they had them do either a once a week resistance training program or a twice a week resistance training program. And then they measured executive functioning. And they found that just once a week, doing some resistance training, it could be light weights, there's other ways to do this, for 20 minutes, led to an 11% improvement in executive functioning. That's huge.
Wow.
Imagine if we had a drug that led to an 11% improvement in executive functioning. That'd be breaking news. I'm sorry, we don't have that drug, but we have the answer here. The twice a week benefits at 13%. Then we can take advantage of this, kind of moving forward and thinking about maybe we could do strength training while dual tasking. So when we look at SMARTfit, think about that. How can we do that? It can be body weight supported, so getting up and down, doing burpees, could be a medicine ball. There's a lot of ways to incorporate that into dual tasking as well. But that same lab that just did this study, they did another study after it. They wanted to know how about people who have been diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment? They did the same type of study with them, and they found twice a week resistance training for people diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment led to a significant improvement in, you know what I'm about to say, executive functioning. And don't glaze over on this research because if somebody has mild cognitive impairment and they don't do anything, they will develop dementia. Research shows that about 20% of people with mild cognitive impairment right now are going to get diagnosable dementia in the next 12 months. 80% of them are going to get it in the next 4 or 5 years. So they're on a
Wow.
downward trajectory. And we can turn that trajectory around twice a week, 20 minutes of resistance training. And this is the time when people realize there's having a problem, their independence is being threatened, they're motivated. It's a really important time to intervene. So it's not just weights. You can get some dumbbells, you can do a Nautilus machine, that counts, certainly, but it can be body weight supported exercises. It could be TheraBand, the stretch material. You get a whole body workout with that. Water exercises as well. Yoga, another type of physical exercise, 15 study meta-analysis, you know where this is going, significantly improves executive functioning. And this one's kind of interesting to think about. We don't know exactly what it is about yoga that has such significant benefits, but if you think about it, many types of yoga is dual tasking, where you're doing one activity, a movement, maybe while focusing on a breath, breathing in on one movement, breathing out on another. That's not too far off of dual tasking. It could also reduce stress. And depending on how you do the yoga, you may be getting both resistance and aerobic training, getting the benefits of both. Same thing with Tai Chi. There's enough research on this now. A recent study did a 20 study meta-analysis, combined data from 20 randomized controlled studies, and they found it led to significant improvements in executive functioning. And dance. It's actually an old body of research. This has been around for, I saw some studies almost 30 years ago on dance and cognition, but it's been revitalized. I see a lot of the research is coming out of China right now. But dancing has also been associated with cognitive improvement. You're going to have to work on attention, focus on learning, dance moves. You also have some spatial abilities that are going to be exercised, some social engagement we're going to talk about today. But, I see many forms of dance appears to have aspects of dual tasking. So that might help. So we have more to say about physical exercise. Ryan's going to be speaking next. And we'll kind of extend this conversation. But now I'm going to hand it over to Ryan.
Thanks, Rob. And I think one of the questions people might be asking is what are the mechanisms? Why is it that exercise can help with cognition and other aspects of brain health, both structural and functional? And it does depend on the intensity and the type of exercise, but there are several things that all forms of exercise seem to have in common. One of these proposed mechanisms is neurogenesis, the creation of new brain cells or neurons in the brain. And this is not yet to be confirmed in all areas of the adult human brain, but one of the areas that's quite discussed often is the dentate gyrus of the hippocampus. In other words, the memory centers of the brain. And memory is, of course, a hot button topic. And even if it doesn't increase the number of neurons in the adult human brain, there may be better connections among those existing brain cells through these bridges that connect the brain cells called synapses, through a process called synaptogenesis. And so it changes in brain structure certainly happen, like the increase or maintenance or preservation of gray matter in the human brain. It could be cortical thickness or the thickness of those areas of the brain. And it could also be the functional adaptations. And synaptogenesis is a functional adaptation. So when we're hearing about the benefits of, say, dance or resistance training on the frontal lobe and executive functions, it's probably more likely due to the fact that we've had some functional changes in the brain, although there are structural contributions to those benefits as well. And then we have growth factors such as BDNF or brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And it's often thought that the expression of BDNF is primarily due to aerobic exercise and the stimulus that comes from that. But there's also research now showing that things like gardening and Tai Chi can release BDNF. So it may be more closely associated with learning and not only physiologic intensity. And then there is angiogenesis, this creation of new connections or actual new capillaries in the brain. And there's over 400 miles worth of blood vessels if you were to connect them together and stretch them out. 400 miles of blood vessels in the adult human brain. So, of course, vascularization of those 400 miles is very important. And reductions in inflammation, reducing neuroinflammatory biomarkers like CRP or changes in IGF-1, TNF alpha. These are all different inflammatory biomarkers that can be decreased through exercise. Of course, improved sleep and better insulin resistance. All of these are more metabolic factors and indirect lifestyle behaviors that in turn directly benefit brain health. And another thing not listed here, but I think it's interesting among yoga and Tai Chi and dance and these more neuromotor activities is the fact that there's learning happening during these activities. And whether or not that includes dual tasking is certainly up for debate. And there's aspects that do include dual tasking, but sometimes we're just watching an instructor do a dance move or a sequence in Tai Chi and learning and trying to encode and hold that information. Next slide. And so, as Rob was saying, who benefits the most in terms of cognition? What's interesting is there's been some really interesting reviews that have come out just this year showing that people can really benefit across the lifespan in terms of improvements in cognition. But because of the distance from the ceiling and because of other neurobiological factors, older adults tend to have the best improvements in cognition. Resistance training is having its moment and seems to be one of the best physical exercises in terms of cognition. But there was a very recent review that reviewed the benefits of exercise across the lifespan, and exergaming, which we'll talk about very soon, and yoga seem to be the top of the list. So depending on the analysis that we're looking for, we're finding that all of these seem to have benefit. And instead of asking which one has the most benefit, we might also want to ask, well, if these have unique benefits, how can we combine them together in a multimodal brain health program that's inclusive of dual task training to get the most benefits? And people with lower baseline fitness seem to benefit more. And so there's no worry about being untrained. In fact, I was just talking to a group earlier today. A lot of them are not doing resistance training. I said the good news is that by starting soon and starting now, you can get the benefits of being untrained. And if you were trained before, you may not get as strong benefits if you were to just start now. Now, before we get into dual tasking, I think it might be helpful to summarize the different mechanisms underlying these different types of training. So, according to this chart, which I think is from Nemitz et al., I believe a 2018 article, um, aerobics and strength training comprise physical training. That's kind of a category where there's physiological demands. And we have talked about how the brain might benefit from this type of exercise by increasing blood flow, therefore increasing the prevalence of these growth factors like BDNF and VEGF and IGF-1 and irisin. And that's through the elevation of the heart rate. That could be through the contraction of musculoskeletal tissue. It's more of these physiological demands that lead to brain health benefits. On the other hand, we have things like motor training, which I've also called neuromotor training. That can be inclusive of something like Tai Chi. And usually these things require balance and coordination, and sometimes flexibility and range of motion, as seen in things like yoga and Pilates. And this primarily improves brain health and cognition through neuromuscular demands. There's motor learning involved, there's the coordination of between brain and muscle. And when we do a combination of these two things through specific skills, we can have both the metabolic demands and the neuromuscular demands and have them simultaneously. And this is shown in things like tennis or racket sports. And also, we can kind of artificially create these demands when we're not doing skill-based activities through things like dual tasking. The example given here is counting backwards while walking. Very common example that's typically done in a dual task assessment. But the idea is that we're doing, well, we'll get to the definition of dual tasking. Let me save that for the next slide. Go ahead. Next slide, please. What is dual tasking? There it is. So dual task is the concurrent performance of two tasks that can be performed independently, be measured separately, and have distinct goals. And we've defined dual tasking so many times. I think it's helpful to continue to define it so we can continue to tease out what's the difference between a complex single task, a cognitively demanding single task, and perhaps a task switch, whether that task switch be complex or simple. So dual tasking is not the same as a complex single task. So carrying a cup of water or a backpack or a suitcase, this is just something that's accomplished with walking. However, when we combine certain activities with walking, particularly motor tasks or cognitive tasks, that would be considered a dual task if they're done at the same time. And these things typically have separate goals. So the purpose of the walking might be to get from point A to point B, but the purpose of drinking or pouring water might be a little bit different, but they're done at the same time. Where I was doing this a lot on my trip to Japan was opening something from a backpack and a zipper while I'm walking, putting it back in the bag, put it back on my back, but continue walking. That would be a dual task. Or unzipping the side pouch. These are primarily motor examples, motor dual tasks. But if we're talking while walking, that would be a cognitive motor dual task. Next slide. So what is it? It's definitely not two cats walking on a treadmill in a complex environment. It's not just a complex single task. Is again the concurrent execution of two separate tasks that can be done independently, measured separately, but are done at the same time. Next slide. So what are the benefits? And a literature review by our dear Dr. Winningham here with us now and Dr. Pacheco found that dual tasking may have one of the largest effect sizes of all interventions reviewed in this paper. And dual tasking may also have the benefit of helping people learn new procedural and motor memories, which is especially important in the context of stroke and Parkinson's. And while dual tasking has many beneficial outcomes, both combined cognitive and physical interventions also hold promise as well. Next slide. So another study looked at about 10 randomized controlled trials on dual tasking and its effects on cognition. And I want to emphasize that when we say moderate or large, these are all significant. So typically when we're looking at effect sizes, they can be a low but significant effect size, moderate but significant, or large but significant. So anything moderate or greater, even if it doesn't sound like a big deal, typically is, especially when we're looking at a review. And so dual task training has been found to have a moderate but significant effect on improved cognitive ability, primarily executive functions, a large and significant effect on the ability to do activities of daily living, bathing, grooming, toileting, and dressing, which is very important because the biggest criticism of computerized cognitive training literature is while it may improve cognition, it may not have the level of transfer that people are looking for. However, according to this study, there is transfer that is shown, which is very important and significant. And then also mood. And as Rob was talking about the benefits and relationships between mood enhancement and cognition, that's not to be taken lightly. When we have fun and we enjoy what we're doing, and there's some benefits on the frontal lobe and the executive function activity associated therein, we have improvements in mood. That can be very helpful for not just improving quality of life, but being related to cognitive improvement as well. Next slide. Another study showed that a 12-week dual task training program yielded not only improvements in executive performance, but according to fMRI, showed an actual improvement in the efficiency and activity of the prefrontal cortex, which, if we're looking at the concept of brain localization, that's where executive functioning primarily lives. Now we're learning it might be a little bit more complicated with these functional brain networks, things like the central executive network, where it's not only localized to this area, but for a study that was done 11 years ago, the research continues to compile and show that both in the central executive network, the prefrontal cortex, and the cognitive abilities that it's related to, i.e. executive functioning, dual task training and combined cognitive and physical training seem to lead to these significant improvements, both moderate and large effect sizes. Next slide. We also cannot talk about cognitive motor training and combined cognitive physical training without exergaming. Exergaming for me is what got me into this field. As a child, I had a traumatic brain injury. I was very overweight. I lost weight and rehabilitated my traumatic brain injury on Dance Dance Revolution. I was born in 1991, and so I was kind of born during the gaming movement, and one of those things was exergaming. And around, I think, 2007 to 2011, the Nintendo Wii started to become very prominent, and that was really one of the first things that brought multiple generations of people together. And in fact, there's about 600, I was just looking at this yesterday, about 600 reviews on exergaming, and 72% of those studies use the Nintendo Wii, specifically Wii Sports or Wii Fit, which is pretty amazing. But nowadays, unless you buy a used Nintendo Wii or you still have one, it's not really accessible. So I think the question is, how do we continue to capitalize on this amazing 2 to 3 decades worth of research on exergaming? And by the way, that's been found across multiple populations. Children, adults, older adults, and even athletes, and especially in clinical populations like stroke and Parkinson's. And how do we continue to capitalize on the benefits that exergaming has found, even if these platforms are no longer easily available? And exergaming does incorporate aspects of dual task training and various cognitive and physical movements. Again, it's been found to have benefits across the lifespan. It's been affiliated with studies in academic achievement in children, all the way to balance and cognition in older adults and people with Parkinson's. Now we also have virtual reality, and things can be immersive or non immersive. And the prevalence of mobile technology and augmented reality is also changing how we interact with extra gaming. And so extra gaming will continue to be something that we talk about. I think as we look at creating programs, we want to consider both dual tasking and extra gaming, as well as other types of neuromotor activities and exercise in general. And these things in combination might be the sweet spot that we're looking for instead of just finding the one type of exercise that does everything for us. Next slide. So to summarize, what are the benefits of dual tasking? And we'll summarize that with extra gaming on the next slide. Cognitive training can improve executive functioning in older adults. We know that. Physical training can improve executive functioning in older adults and others. We know that. Younger people can still improve executive functioning through training and lifestyle and building cognitive reserve. And dual tasking can and should improve the automatic nature of any mobility based skill, ADLs, balance, performance, and so on. Next slide, please. So let's summarize the benefits of dual task training and extra gaming together. Both have been found to increase prefrontal and frontoparietal activation. The frontoparietal network is one of those brain networks I was referring to earlier, and that includes the frontal and parietal lobes, as the name insinuates. And of course, better connectivity and activation during executive functioning tasks, and enhanced processing efficiency, which means we use less resources, less neural resources to accomplish the same thing following intensive cognitive motor training. There also seems to be improved connections between the areas of the brain responsible for movement and cognition, particularly those associated with executive functioning. And in terms of dosage, usually about 3 months or 12 weeks is what we find is necessary, but there's research showing as little as 6 to 8 weeks with higher frequency, about 2 times a week, with sessions at least 20 minutes in duration. Now, this does depend on the population and the exact details of the intervention, but it is good to know what those minimum dosages might be. Next slide. So what is a program? What I lovingly call a brain gym, in air quotes. It would be a combination of clinical or serious extra games, dual task training techniques, assessments, including cognitive assessments, physical assessments, and dual task assessments, of course, incorporating technology, and these can be done both in private, group, and even telehealth-based settings. And this can look different for everybody, and it should, based on your budget, based on your business, based on your setting, based on the people you're serving. This can look like a lot of different ways. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Mike Studer to take it from here.
Excellent. Ryan, thank you so much. And I will begin my screen share. And while I'm doing that, I'll encourage all of you to continue to populate the Q&A with more questions as you have been. We see you there and we see them waiting for us. And you should be seeing my slides now. I will be joining you for two separate segments here today, interceded by Dr. Kathy Lamberti's presentation, and I'm going to present exactly what you see as the question posed now. So what is aging? How do we actually control, mitigate aging? How do we complement the science of brain health programming that Dr. Winningham and the very near to be future Dr. Glatt, I'll like to refer to him already as they have presented. So we want to complement brain health so that we can be truly comprehensive and these individuals can maximize from their invested benefits. All right. So just going to challenge some thoughts here. We're going to potentially even debunk some myths. What is your bias / opinion here about aging? Is aging all genetic? There's really nothing that I can control. The way my parents and grandparents aged, the diseases, conditions, syndromes, or health that they experienced will be what I experience, regardless of my lifestyle and choices. Unlikely that you believe that, but how much of it is genetic? Is all aging controllable? The complete diametric 180-degree reverse, regardless of what I inherited, I will be able to control everything with my environment and choices. Well, we wouldn't likely believe that to be the case either. But what do you need to maximize your efforts? Medications, supplements, injections, peptides to age well? Should you just stop thinking about slowing or reversing aging and stop spending so much time wringing your hands about microplastics and cognitive programming and exercise and sleep and perfecting diet and social interactions and just celebrate your wins and not focus so much on the micromanagement of your health span? Potentially, that's an option as well. Let's see where the science affords us the best opportunities so we're not spending all of our time thinking about every single decision and we're benefiting optimally from the brain health programming that we are doing. We're going to start that concept with inflammation. Now, in the consideration that inflammation leads to an accelerated expression of the aging process, we're actually looking at a combination, contraction of the words inflammation and aging. You already made that synthesis in your minds right now. And two major approaches to this are evidenced here by Franceschi and colleagues 2017, Shintuo and colleagues 2020, and you see inflammaging as those cells that have already gone through a natural cycle, are potentially building up with toxins, not being processed, recycled, and in fact, decayed and exposed of or exhausted or wasted appropriately. And we see these dead and decaying cells lying around, if you will, and creating, let's say, metabolic problems for us in the form of inflammation. You see Shintuo suggesting that gradual changes in the microbiota, our gut microbiome, some 39 trillion single cell organisms that outnumber our own cells, may actually be a solution to controlling aging, and in fact, when not cared for in a healthy manner, may be one gateway by which we're not optimizing our own inflammation. So we think about the multidirectional physiology of inflammation for a moment, being negative on our brain health, something that, if controlled or optimized, would have given us the opportunity to benefit from the brain health programming that Dr. Winningham and Ryan Glatt have shared with us. We see that a persistent damage to the inner lining of arteries, we see microvascular changes of inflammation, and we see that with stress in our lives, perceived and reality-based stressors, we see cortisol, very reductive, simplified expression of inflammation here. We see a cascade of events that increase blood sugar. We may see increased blood pressure that comes along with that, especially as the lumens of our arteries become a little bit more hardened, calcify, atherosclerotic. We see persistent fatigue as an expression from this. And that may also limit our ability to be able to utilize some of the movement-based health that Rob and Ryan were speaking of. And finally, we see an expression of signaling molecules that negatively influence gene expression toward a methylation and potentially even an evidence of disease in the form of any number of cancers, degenerative diseases, and otherwise. So inflammation can lead to negative pathways in many ways, some of which you may have already heard of. That could be referred to as a leaky brain, which, yes, as we'll see in a few moments, would be linked to something you're likely more familiar with, a leaky gut. So you may have heard of dementia being referred to as diabetes of the brain or type 3 diabetes. And we see here in a very reductive and overly simplified figure that, in fact, we see some gapping in the blood-brain barrier that can, in fact, allow larger molecules to enter into the brain. We see inflammation having an opportunity to impact the brain. And therefore, again, let's tie it back, big picture. This limits the positive work that we are doing in exergaming, dual tasking, movement, and otherwise. So all of these sorts of problems can actually lead to diagnoses and syndromes that are treatable, but potentially would have also been preventable. And we see this in autoimmune degenerative diseases and otherwise. So again, we'll call this a leaky brain. Now, both of my preceding colleagues have done an exceptional job talking about role of physical activity, both as a singular as well as a complement of divided attention work. So let's just take a moment to see what physical activity does short term. It's going to shock you for just a moment, because remember, these are just the short term immediacy effects of physical activity. Now, in 1901, studying individuals having completed one of the first Boston marathons, they took blood work from 4 marathoners. Okay, hold your horses here, because we could say in a reactionary fashion, well, I don't want any part of something that elevates my heart rate and blood pressure, elevates cortisol and core body temperature, raises my blood sugar and dehydrates me, elevates my inflammatory biomarkers and my systemic inflammation, deforms tendons, muscles, bones with microstressors, and usually does, shunt blood away from vital organs, not the least of which would be liver, gut, kidneys. Wow, that doesn't sound like we want any part of exercise, physical activity, mobility. So we go back to the pill that Dr. Winningham was theorizing about just 31 minutes ago as a magic pill. And we say, well, we want none of that. But remember, this is just the short term, because sometimes health comes in the form of a stressor that, when processed and also formed a resilience within, we actually benefit from that. So this puts us in great position for some good news. So physical activity, in fact, when performed consistently at different levels of intensity, as a matter of fact, and in different combinations, as Ryan suggested, with and without cognitive activity, complex nature, multitasking, or otherwise. And yes, we'll qualify the multitasking, but definitely in dual tasking, on a consistent basis, rather than reactionary as a very short-term immediate basis, physical activity can reduce inflammation, reduce the expression of degenerative diseases, cancers, and otherwise, reduce expression of that diabetes type 3, and in fact, via, but not only through, pathways of inflammation. But now let's talk about the fact that physical activity also does something else beneficial that Ryan alluded to, talking about increasing regional blood flow when we talk about synaptogenesis, and we in fact talk about neurogenesis. None of that happens, even in the areas that it does happen in the human brain, without improved blood flow and stimulus. So how do we control inflammation? Summarizing a little bit here, and we'll come back to inflammation on a couple other small points. I won't read these to you in total, but you will be given just a second to look through these a little bit. And the good news is there are many different pathways, yes, including physical activity, but we're about ready to explode the details on a few more of these, because we're going to go into nutrition, sleep, social interactions, and one more surprising category. And the nice thing is, you can choose what seems appealing and approachable and reasonable and also logical for you to apply in your life. So, yep, we started it off with physical activity. We dive into blood flow, that when we're performing complex task environment interactions, we get a little bit more of this prefrontal cortex activity, and especially when activities are novel to us, require rules, maybe the cognitive set is changing, and that can be especially an interactive and complex activity. Now, when we're performing something that even Dr. Winningham talked about, that could include something like bodybuilding, resistance activity, complex whole body things, and maybe even a little bit into the I am aware of my body part is here, Tai Chi and yoga-esque. We may get some benefits here in a primary motor cortex. This would be even a little bit more likely with especially some of the long forms of breath work, yoga, mindfulness with the capacities, and could also be captured in some of the Tai Chi and martial arts activities. Where is my body? A little bit more generalized here into the parietal lobe, primary sensory cortices, and also integrations of sensations. Now, especially here, as I performed this morning, much to my pleasure, some singles pickleball open chain activities. This could also be found in tennis, ping pong, and many other things where I have to interact with the environment or a competitor, partner, or otherwise. Even as Dr. Winningham talked about a little bit here with dance. One person leading, one person following, maybe reversing. I need to interact with the environment, inanimate or animate persons as well. So here we get the more likely and predictable opportunities in the cerebellum. Now, again, as Ryan talked about, here we have a little bit more in the exergaming, complex activities, concentration, nuance, specific attention to detail. And we see a lot of the exergaming here having benefit. Again, this is very reductive to say it in this fashion, but we're going to have, a little bit more of the hippocampal blood flow increase here. Now, when we perform physical activity on an intermittent basis that fits into our lifestyle, we can have something that's commonly now known as VILPA, Vigorous Intermittent Lifestyle Physical Activity is the acronym here. Stamatakis and colleagues are typically the primary authors on these, and you'll find Eugene Stamatakis as first or last author somewhere in most of these. Look for VILPA if you're interested. It's summarized well for you here, 20 to 30 seconds bursts of activity in something you would have already been doing. I'm commuting to work. I'm going to hustle up for 20 to 30 seconds. I have the opportunity to take the stairs, and I'll take them two at a time, those types of things. And you see a couple of examples for you here as well. Studies have clearly demonstrated benefits in longevity, just some jaw-dropping statistics here, but also staying on point here today, some clear benefits in brain health as well, demonstrating our ability to promote some more blood flow, reduce some inflammation along the way. A couple of just very quick slides giving you some practical examples in combination of VILPAs or exercise snacks here, along with if you will, a categorization of those, more aerobic inclinations, strength, and some mixed opportunities. Because you'll have access to the slides, and it would be insulting for me to try to go through all of these for you, I'll just hearken you to reach back toward these slides for your future consumption when you're ready, and obviously for sharing with other colleagues that weren't here today. All right, so again, these VILPAs and exercise snacks, just trying to present physical activity in various forms of intensity as something that can be easily grasped a snack of. All right, as I told you, part 2 on inflammation is here. The physical activity portion now summarized, and not something we need to do such a deep dive with, but as you see, these 6 bullet points here give us some of the directions that physical activity pathways that are being studied here. So exert yourself against resistance, Skeletal muscle releases anti-inflammatory properties, myokines, exerkines, and yes, in fact, the root of all evils, if you were in school like I was in the late 1980s, lactate was to be blamed for delayed onset muscle soreness and also burning muscles, etc. But in fact, if you have desire to do deeper dive, you'll find it to be neurotrophic, neuroprotective, and oh, by the way, reduces some of those leaky brain gaps and leaky gut gaps. Lactate is one of the few things that actually feeds that pathway as well. We won't go into the rest of those. I've already addressed blood flow. If you're interested, extracellular superoxide dismutase as a neutralizing free radical, and Klotho, something to be looked in as a protein as well. So your hemoglobin A1C, your long-term record of blood sugar, can be benefited through high-intensity interval training and time spent on these matters just for a consistency. The timing is also a function here. As you notice, maybe that exercise snack immediately timed as movement after a meal could help you benefit more optimally from your brain health programming by reducing the inflammation that you didn't have to experience. We're going to shift now into nutrition and give you an opportunity to put something literally onto your programming plate to help your brain health, with the consideration that if it feels convenient for you, realistic for you, to try to see if you can strive for 30 different plants per week. Doesn't mean 30 vegetables, doesn't mean 30 fruits, doesn't mean 30 seeds or nuts or herbs. It actually is a combination of all of those, has proven to actually be, you guessed it, anti-inflammatory. So now one other qualifier on this, on that segment of brain health, is that the same plant, spinach, for example, carrots, for example, prepared in 2 different ways counts as 2 different of that 30. So count all of your seeds, nuts, grains, legumes, vegetables, and otherwise, roots and otherwise, all can be anti-inflammatory. So if we take our final look at inflammation here, let's just keep in mind that from a nutrition standpoint, we can regulate blood sugar if we watch the timing of our meals, space them out a little bit, move after our meals. Try to consume things that would potentially offer anti-inflammatory, and I won't have the opportunity to do a huge deep dive on that today, but as I alluded to earlier, help your gut microbiome. 39 trillion may have some voting rights, if you will, coming from your stomach and intestines. And we find that reducing sugars, increasing fibers, using potentially even some fermenting type foods, if those are preferential to you as well, can also provide a short chain fatty acid pathway by which the gut microbiome can act as well. As you notice here, it comes into content and timing, and those are options that you have and you can choose from. And you remember the leaky brain option, and recall the same principles will be there for us in the leaky gut option. And this is primarily how most of the systemic inflammation occurs for persons with a lot of the conditions that you see here. We're going to shift topics again and move into social connection. And this is not going to be news to many of you on the live presentation or recording, that being unintentionally alone, known as unintentional solitude, is equated to about smoking 15 cigarettes per day. Now, again, there's great research on this, which actually goes through the pathways of inflammation, no surprise to you there, but also pathways of your immune system health, your mental health, and also the interior lumens of your arteries as well. Now, when we consider these matters, we also have to think about the personal preference of intentional solitude. So the negativity of unintentional solitude can be balanced if an individual has preferences towards some intentional solitude. We don't want either of those to be considered to be polar opposites and all time, full time. But when we want to be alone and need to be alone in nature with our own thoughts, meditation, mindfulness, prayer, awe, and all of the different fashions there, we may also benefit from intentional solitude. So we balance that out and not think you have to be with people all of the time, 24/7. So we don't want anyone to feel that they are moving past their own personality and preferences. We want individuals to have the opportunity to choose for themselves to complement their brain health. This study here just talks about things that we can do to optimize our brain health when we are intentionally alone. Again, awe, mindfulness, nature, and etc. Choice is optimized there. I believe that explains just some of those opportunities toward balance. And these would be things that we may do either with ourselves or can be done in conjunction with others silently or again in communal efforts. We're going to move now again to just summarize this section on social connectivity toward optimizing brain health. And again, just knowing that we also get benefits of diversity in how we think, perspectives that we have, theory of mind, potentially self-efficacy through vicarious experiences. I had a friend that went through that when we have those diverse connections, and we feel that we may also be able to overcome these matters as well. And it can come into problem solving. I hadn't thought about it that way. Oh my gosh, I could get back into my locked home because I heard Marjorie tell that story as well. We get benefit of hearing from, sharing with, learning from, empathizing with, and all of those come in neuromodulators as well as expressed here. You may be surprised or not surprised to know that social connection, even though we didn't highlight it with another slide, is another nice anti-inflammatory if we went to type 4. I only mentioned it briefly in the cigarette analogy. All right, so nearly our last pivot here. We have just 2 left before I turn it over to Kathy, and we're ready to talk about sleep. Sleep, as Ryan alluded to here, is clearly a strong player in optimizing our brain health. We have rapid eye movement and non-rapid eye movement, non-REM sleep. Those have different functions. Be they dishwasher-like cleansing cycles on our brain? In fact, yes. Be they consolidating the learning and solidifying the learning, giving an opportunity for us to make those new synapses that Ryan talked about in synaptogenesis, and to be able to give us the opportunity to level out toward a more thymic nature of our cortisol and etc. So a little bit of a summary there for you. And it appears as though nothing should be reduced down to a singular action, but it does appear as though if you had the opportunity to control the time of night you sleep and the time of day you awaken, and those did follow some, let's just say, diurnal pathways of darkness and light, that may be an optimized way for you to be able to leverage the sleep, let's just say the sleep variable in your brain health. Meaning if you can go to sleep about 30 minutes plus or minus from a regular time every single night, and slightly less important, but also important, awaken naturally on your own at about the same time every morning. That appears to help us take care of the quantity and quality in the form of regularity, and also helps us to be able to optimize that sleep latency, getting to bed, and actually efficiency, getting to sleep very quickly. Few sideline comments there that are known as sleep hygiene that are truly levers, not intending to talk about biohacking because we're not talking about that, but levers that you can pull to actualize your best version of sleep to complement your brain health program. We won't talk about those entirely right now in the presentation, but again, I'll give you yet another reminder to populate the Q&A should you have questions about some of these matters along the way. Don't forget, if you're watching this by recording, feel free to reach out to the emails that we've provided for you as well. So we do try to put some of the myths to sleep about bed and bedtime. We want to put some of those myths aside. Regularity is number one. We do benefit from scarcity for nearly almost everything else. Scarcity and variety and adaptability and challenging ourselves to go longer without food, to some degree healthy, to be able to go longer in your endurance work, again, to challenge yourself to lift more, but we don't do that in sleep. We don't challenge ourselves to sleep distracted, sleep with lights on, get away with less sleep, or sleep as long as we can. Sleep needs regularity. And it's our best time to solidify connections and truly to hold on to new factual information. You want to sleep before you're learning, before you're exposed to learning, sleep the night of the day in which you were exposed, and sleep before you need to perform and utilize and mobilize those memories. So sleep, in fact, could be the most powerful variable of everything that could be actualized throughout a person's life. Sleep, water, food, social connection, movement. Guess what? A person's going to expire most quickly when they're without sleep on this list. All right, so the science on napping, very, very briefly, we really don't know anything about napping. For persons that prefer it, choose it, need it, want it, and this can have some flex throughout life. We really don't know enough right now, and we would never want to coerce someone to take or not take a nap. But it appears as though, on the whole, napping for something in the neighborhood of 8 to 20 minutes, 2 to 3 times per week, can, in fact, no surprise here, be to a degree an anti-inflammatory agent and also help someone at least improve short-term cognitive performance. Much more to be said there, but we'll leave it at that for right now. So we're headed for home, and we're in our home stretch dive here, and we're going to talk about the last attribute of that physical activity, nutrition, and also sleep, rest, play, and social connection. And now the one that I was alluding to is the notion that exposing ourselves to challenge. So programming intentional challenges can be extremely healthy for us. On the y-axis, you'll see to the left, called out unintentional stressors. This is what your social media feed has been talking about. You've got to reduce the stress in your life. And how practical is that to be done? The Challenge Life Matrix, without me talking you all the way through it, says, hey, if your life is filled with unintentional stressors, you're more likely to experience something up in here with this upper left-hand quadrant, all in the y-axis, nothing toward the x-axis. Life stressors are controlling you. Depression and inflammatory diseases can build up. Let's orient you to the x-axis for a moment. Intentional life stressors. So you are programming yourself toward exergaming, divided attention, physical activity, time-restricted feeding, and also extremes of, let's say, thermal in nature or novel activities. So we could have ice plunges, sauna, learning how to play the piano, and the list goes on and on. And if we have some capacity to program in that direction, we can mitigate and balance out some of the unintentional life stressors. So in this upper right-hand quadrant right over in here, we have unintentional life stressors present in everyone's life. balanced or mitigated to some degree by intentional life stressors and dropping some of the allostatic load, inflammation, and the rest goes on. I'll let you just consume that and potentially ask questions in the Q&A. More about that should you have desire. And then, as Rob mentioned, I can hardly talk without talking about gamification, but a very simple one slide for you here because we have a earlier contribution in this 6 webinar series that talks more about this. And if an individual's personality and preferences cause them to be inclined toward engagement, we just have to keep in mind that there are many ways to gamify and to track and compete in a healthy manner. Remembering that we want to make certain that we keep healthy strategies available and reasonable and reachable. So we want a lot of nudge. We want it to be easy for us to make it to a brain health programming, easy for us to get to bed on time, easy for us to eat healthy snacks or to get some VILPA, vigorous intermittent lifestyle physical activity. And we want to minimize the friction of those things and maybe intentionally put some friction toward things that we prefer to stay away from. Another opportunity, as we expressed in an earlier program, is to motivate ourselves by loss aversion. One healthy way of doing that without fear-mongering is looking forward toward your future self. And even some mental imagery on that. I'm doing this for my 75-year-old self. Just a few ideas there, and you can populate the Q&A with more of that. It is my pleasure at this point to stop screen sharing, turn it over to Kathy Lamberti, who's going to share with us just a little bit more to complement our effort. Kathy, it is yours.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. It's just an incredible honor and pleasure to be part of this program because when I created SMARTfit, I didn't really know what I was doing. I was following this whole thing intuitively, and I just wanted to make my contribution to the world something that helped to lead the world in a better place than I found it. So I dedicated my life to creating this technology, and the bottom line of it came out of the fact that we are in a world that is being run by technology today. And I saw that coming 35 years ago. And I gave up teaching and I gave up my career and I came to the United States and I just wanted to do this. And so thanks to Billie Jean King, who was my early mentor on this and really gave me a lot of encouragement. What I wanted to do was to use technology to swim upstream. Where technology was taking us in one direction, I wanted to use the technology to help heal this DNA thing we have in each of us, which helps us connect to the world we live in. And that is, we start with a thought, and the thought, 250,000 years ago was a thought about survival. I'm hungry. I need safety. I need whatever it is. And then we would throw our bodies at it until we created the ability to produce it. So this is key because what we've done with SmartFit is we've created a technology that provides the input for us as the human to be the input device, connecting to all of these stimuli and bringing about that same kind of cognitive motor connection. And so what we did was we created a product suite, but we realized there were shortcomings in what we had to offer. So we went out and we found partners who theoretically were competitors, but in reality, they were offering something that we didn't. So we partnered up with them, and we have very successfully been providing suites of products that work for the customer. And when I listen to all of the speakers today, they've taken it one step further. In reality, SmartFit can do so much. We can provide that cognitive motor movement, engagement, social exercise, etc. But what was missing was the food we eat and the rest we get and how we sleep and how we nurture ourselves in other ways. And what was presented today kind of fulfills on my wish on how to show a model that works for a healthy lifestyle as we move into the future, especially with AI moving us more and more into physical irrelevance. So I'm going to share some models because while our technology works for everybody, we've had to learn to to customize. I'm just going to move this out the way. We've had to learn to provide programming for everybody. And so, for credibility, we started in medical with acute neuro, chronic conditions, and orthopedic conditions. We earned our stripes in medical. Then we moved into senior living, and we focused more on memory care and long-term care. And then last year, we came out with a whole suite of products for independent living. And concurrently, we launched into the world of high performance sports and military training. So, what we have here is a technology that can be customized to suit every human being on the planet, regardless of their cognitive motor demands. So, that is what I call a milestone for the company, what we fulfilled. And then in joining partnership with um, other manufacturers, you can see how we've created models that can suit any kind of organization. We have to suit you. We have to suit your client base. And so for a senior living wellness space that doesn't have a lot of space, here's a beautiful model using the SMARTfit along with the Senso. And these two products work incredibly well together. And we just love the company. We love who they are. And we've been very successful in providing a joint solution here. Here's another example. Oh, that's another angle of the same one. And then we will go to independent living, but this is now independent and assisted living because you can see here you can bring a wheelchair into this space and you can still work. But now we've added what we call the Pro Trainer, which is your group, small group, large group training, and it's also your social component. And you can add a lot of strength training, cardio training, but that social connection of playing in teams, that just breaks down the walls of the shy ones. And I was called in to help with the filming last year, and I was dragged in, and I didn't want to do it. I'm a shy person. I like to be quiet in the background, but they hauled me in for this. It was short, and after 3 hours, I had like 5 or 6 best friends, and I walked away going, "My gosh, the most fabulous thing about this was I connected with total strangers, and I kind of fell in love with them." So I might show you a little bit of video of all of us playing together, and you can see total strangers becoming best friends in a matter of minutes. So again, that's another angle of that product. Then we move into more independent, high performance. Now you've got your older adults who are going to defy the aging process. We're going to be 85 and we're going to climb Machu Picchu. Here we go. So we've added strength training, cardio training, and we brought in the cyber cycle for the cycle. So there's another expansion of the concept utilizing our partners. And then we go to high performance athletic training, and we've added a lot more strength training here and a lot more functional training. But again, it's all a brain health program. And by the way, it doesn't matter what age you are, you can go in here and do this. And actually, what you're looking at here is a simulation, pretty close simulation to what Pikes Peak YMCA in Colorado is doing. So we have customers out there doing this. And it's so much fun to see the creativity that comes forward in how these configurations can be put together to suit the customer. Here's a multi-purpose room being put to purpose. The systems take up no space other than 4 or 5 inches and no more than 3 or 4 inches actually on the walls. And when you turn those systems off, the room is available for Tai Chi, yoga, martial arts, whatever you want. Basketball, you can do whatever you like in that room because it's non-invasive usage of space. So that's just some examples of how you can work with people in the industry to do that. I'm going to be a little bit naughty here and show you this group that I was training with. I won't put sound, I'll talk while we go. We don't have to hear the sound, but it's just watch strangers getting together for a shoot and see how this connection happens. I think social connection is huge, even though I'm shy and not myself, you know? Over to you, Mike.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I will re-pick up the share and I will just remind all of us one more time to go ahead and populate the Q&A section. And as I begin to wrap us up here, we will be ready to field all of your questions. Okay, so get back to right where we are. Okay. This is the question that we are posed to ask right now. After you've heard everything today, you should be well positioned to really, in fact, ask and answer for yourself and even answer for other people that are asking you. What is aging? What are the facts and myths? Do you think it's obligatory to experience dementia, cortical atrophy, falls, frailty, and dependence? Or can we potentially position ourselves for better? So, does aging look like this for you? Part of it, your mindset will in fact have some predictive capacity. So we have to think to ourselves at this point in our world and societies, plural, we have things that we blame on aging, yet in fact, they may fall in the bucket of what society tells us to expect from aging, or the choices that we've made that in fact accelerate our aging experiences. So if we were to think that we could do nothing about it, it would be uncontrollable. And in fact, we might not have any incentives to engage in brain health programming, physical activity, optimizing my sleep, diet, play, and otherwise. In fact, no, that's not the case. Aging does include physiologic losses at this point that are programmed, that are a function of our environmental exposures, but also genetic tendencies and otherwise. So we do truly have some things of organs timing out, if you will, heart rate, lungs, capacities in VO2, nerve conduction, velocities, ability to generate and recruit strength and power. We do have some losses that are mitigatable, that if we haven't programmed optimally, could even be improved in aging. Yes, there are some physiologic changes. However, some of the losses that we've blamed on aging are a function of choice. No surprise to you now, we understand that when we retire from gainful work, if we don't replace stimuli that we got from work, remembering what time of day it is, what the project is, who's this person named, what is the appropriate sequence, and etc. If we don't replace those stimuli because we've retired, we should expect not losses as a function of aging, but losses as a function of learned non-use. Yet we blame that on aging. So in fact, when we have fewer experiences to climb stairs, we should lose strength. but we have an opportunity to choose to replace the stimuli and programming even in other fashions, even if we move from a two-story to a one-story home. But let's not forget that the "I'll help you with that," "shouldn't he be," "shouldn't she stop," all of those include potentially harmful, societally influences losses because it suppresses what we expect of ourselves. Again, what you don't use, you in fact should expect to lose. So we shouldn't be blaming that on aging. So aging is in fact comprised of three distinct processes: cellular processes, lifestyle choices, and in fact, acquired diseases included in all three of those. So we have to now also consider my impression, what I expect of my predictive processing will in fact create some self-fulfilling prophecies on top of my aging experiences. This is what my father's aging experience was like. I expect this of myself. I watch for it. I have mindset for it. And to no one's surprise, those predictions are fulfilled. So predictive processing is something we have to think about for our patients, our loved ones, and for ourselves. Our biopsychosocial experiences will create preformed notions of what we expect. We'll be watchful for it, creating confirmation biases, and we'll be more attentive to those instances that reinforce what we predicted would happen. So why not take those predictions and make them optimize, growth mindset, positive? I've been doing something about my brain health, so I expect it to get better. Predictive processing does not have to be negative because, in fact, we can have a dopaminergic experience when our rewards are coming because they don't fulfill negative processing that we have absorbed as a stereotype. We have a surprising win. I didn't think I could get stronger. Reward prediction error, positive prediction error, dopaminergic, brain healthy, and you see all of this together. So what we've attempted to bring to you today is now a more comprehensive understanding of what we can do to optimize brain health by utilizing physical activity, nutrition, sleep, social connectivity, challenging experiences within all of the umbrellas that we've got. If you want to program, you've got to make certain that that program has a chance to optimize. This gives us a wonderful opportunity to relax for a moment, receive your questions, dialogue in a little bit more intimate fashion with you to help to conclude our 6-part webinar series. So Dr. Winningham, Kathy Lamberti, and myself will be in great position to answer your questions, and I'll stop screen sharing now so that we can begin to open up your Q&A panel then as well. We'll have enough time for you to continue to add to those. And remember, if you're watching and recording, feel free to reach out to us via email. Ryan did need to leave to another commitment, so he won't come back on for this. Rob, you want to guide us through the first questions there?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And I think Tom might also have some questions as well. But the first question that came in, I think it was right after I got done talking. We're talking about the age, the research on who can benefit the most from cognitive training and physical training. Somebody asked, what about if you're older than 70 or 80 years? And I thought that was a great question. And yes, the benefits still can be had if we're older than that. I do think it's important though, because when I read the research and I think everybody who presented today is taking a very optimistic view, but I really should say when we develop, really significant dementia, mid to late stage dementia, some of these things that at least I said about improving executive functioning become much more difficult, if not impossible. So it might be too late if somebody waits too long along a neurodegenerative disease process like Alzheimer's. With that said, this is kind of a different conversation. There is research to show even in people living with mid to late stage dementia, their quality of life can be improved, particularly with physical activity, maintaining lower extremity strength. Some studies have shown, put even really tagged high values in terms of cost of savings for caregivers if somebody is able to make it to the bathroom on their own without having 24/7 care, not to mention the dignity that comes with that. So there's a lot more than James, you asked in that question. Yes, it's people older than 80 can still benefit, but late stage dementia, we lose some of the abilities to benefit. Next question, and I'm wondering if Kathy might want to field this one. In terms of community facilities such as YMCA's, how has SmartFit been successfully implemented? Even though we're in Florida, SmartFit has really not taken off in our local senior population. In order to expand from a SmartFit Mini to perhaps a Pro Trainer, it might be helpful to see how it is successfully implemented by reaching different populations. So I'll defer to Kathy and Tom on that.
That's a really great question. And we've noticed two trends going on. One trend was the people who acquired the SmartFit for, say, Parkinson's or dementia, and they've got one for a system like the SmartFit Mini just for the one-on-one training. That hasn't taken off as well as when the other YMCAs who invested in the group training, the large group training, even though they invested for Parkinson's, it was the same disease, same condition, the energy and ignition that took place in that Y was so much more electric. And so they started with the SmartFit group training with the Pro Trainer, and that became group training for everybody at different times of the day. And then it became group training for sports. And so the embracement of the SmartFit technology really changed in the community centers when we offered the group training. It's more economical. You've got a single trainer training multiple people, so your costs are so much lower when you're doing group training. And when it comes to youth, you've got someone at maybe $20 an hour training 20 or 30 kids at the time. So you really look at the economics of that and then the utilization of the same space. You can still do your one-on-one training. And what's trending now is customers will buy both a Pro Trainer and a Mini so that they can do the high cognitive, they can do the assessments, but they can mix it up much better. I think that's what we're seeing.
Well, and if I can kind of take that lead, Kathy, I've done a lot of brain health programs, and one of the things that I came to really realize, the group-based programming had many advantages. Actually, I did this back in some clinics that Mike had many years ago, and we did for years. We had 2 levels of classes for really intensive cognitive stimulation, early dual tasking, and after a couple of months, I had a hard time getting the class started because the participants were so busy catching up. They didn't, at some point, they weren't even coming to see Mike and me. They were coming to see each other. And so if one of the challenges we have with, brain health programming, physical exercise programming is retaining people in the programming. The group interaction is great, not
Of
to
course.
mention this, the cognitive stimulation, the social engagement they get by being together.
There's one other thing, and that is at a community level, the level of trainer is mostly not primed to do brain health right up front. Okay. Secondly, a lot of them have an ageism thing. They don't want you to go and work with those broken people. They have this, I'm here for the performance side. And that barrier gets broken down when it becomes social, fun, engaging, and all populations. And we change the narrative. Now, I believe we have a lot of work to do to sell the idea that brain health is about building cognitive reserve, just like your investment in your 401k plan. The earlier you start, the better, you know. So in a number of community centers, we need to change the subject from being for those broken people, and they come in fear-based, they're working on one-on-one, and there's a fear base around it, to just blowing it open with a whole lot of fun and that social connection.
You know, there's one other element that I particularly have affinity for in this question, and that is the notion that's uh, really known as a common enemy theory. And the fact that we're all working together to, let's say, control cognitive decline and aging appears to coalesce some groups. And it's rather like the grade school fundraising experience that many of us of a certain age would be familiar with, where we see the thermometer and we see the mercury rising on the thermometer when we make it to $1,000 raised. And we understand that that common goal against a common enemy of aging, or however it's framed, is something that can be particularly healthy, that reinforces the consistency that's necessary for the dosage to be effective.
I'd like to take this moment to just thank everybody, thank our customers, thank you experts, and thank you for the mentoring. What isn't understood is that I'm not a clinical expert. I've created what this company and its technology mostly on intuition, and just because I'm a farm kid that engaged my brain and body a lot, right? So, and I'm a school teacher who didn't like to see kids sitting down all day. So I don't come at this with the science. So what has gone on over the last decade is Mike and Rob and Ryan have embraced me as my coaches, and they've taught me about the science of what we've been creating. So we've got intuition running here, and then the science marrying with it. And it's just been an incredible privilege to work with you. And for all those nights I spent in absolute doubt about, am I crazy? What am I doing? You guys calmed my mind, and I got the sleep I needed.
Well, good. I think your intuition has been spot on and supported by the scientific research, Kathy.
Yeah. Happy to be here for the ride that we have taken and continuing forward as well. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.